Good evening and welcome to RestartED's virtual town hall, the 10th in a series of panel discussions that brings education stakeholders from across the country together each Thursday. RestartED is a grassroots movement aimed at crowdsourcing solutions for safely reopening and operating schools in a COVID and post-COVID world. Your contributions are critical, so open the chat room at the bottom of your screen and actively contribute your questions, thoughts, and solutions. The focus of tonight's panel is caring for each other and ourselves in school reopening. We have a truly distinguished group of educators and mental health professionals with us this evening. So with no further delay, I'd like to introduce our panel. David Adams is the Senior Director of Strategy at the Urban Assembly. He previously served as Director of Social Emotional Learning at Urban Assembly, and prior to that was the Social Emotional Learning Coordinator for District 75, where he shaped the district's approach to social emotional learning for students with severe cognitive behavioral challenges. He has worked internationally in schools in England, standing up and evaluating programs of positive behavioral supports and social emotional learning as a research intern at Yale University's Health, Emotion, and Behavior Lab, and published multiple academic papers around the relationship of social emotional competence and student academic and behavioral outcomes. David is co-author of The Educator's Practical Guide to Emotional Intelligence, which was published in 2020. He serves on the board of directors of CASEL and is an engineering officer in the Army Reserve. David holds a master's in educational psychology from Fordham University. Terry Lawler is passionate about making equity of opportunities available to all students regardless of zip code. Delaware's 2010 School Psychologist of the Year, Terry has spent her career translating research to practice in some of Delaware's most vulnerable school communities. Current projects include social and emotional competence, universal screening for behavior and academics, strengthening multi-tiered systems of support with neurosequential strategies for healing the brain and body, the creation of trauma-informed systems of care for school communities, out-of-school providers, and other youth-serving organizations. Terry is a co-founding member of Delaware's Compassionate Schools Learning Collaborative and the City of Wilmington's Advisory Council for Youth Gun Violence Prevention, and co-creator of the Compassionate Schools Test Lab. In November 2018, Terry joined the Office of Education and Innovation and Improvement at the Delaware Department of Education as the Education Associate for Trauma-Informed Practices and Social Emotional Learning. Chi Kim is the Chief Executive Officer at Pure Edge, Inc. Prior to joining Pure Edge, she was a California school superintendent, as well as a former school principal, teacher, leadership coach, and has served as program officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She is a co-founder of the Teaching Garden program that was adopted by the American Heart Association to support heart health through school gardens. Chi is a 2018 Pahara Aspen Education Fellow, serves as the board chair and trustee of the Great Minds Board, a member of CASEL Board of Directors, and sits on the Advisory Council of SEL for US, Project Wayfinder, Center for Reaching and Teaching the Whole Child, and Family Code Night, MV Gain. Ken McGill is a senior training and consultation specialist and is the statewide trainer on wraparound, the fundamental evidence-based practice offered throughout the New Jersey Children's System of Care, and the Child and Adolescent's Needs and Strengths curriculum. Ken was 2013 recipient of the Prade Foundation's Outcome Champion Award for his work in the Children's System of Care and Outcomes Management. He has more than 20 years of experience in marriage and family therapy, education, and research, and is currently serving as president of the New Jersey Association of Marriage and Family Therapy. Ken received his education specialist degree in marriage and family therapy and his master's in education from Seton Hall University. And now I'd like to turn it over to our moderator for this evening, Dr. David Adderhold, Superintendent of the West Windsor Plainsboro Regional School District and President of the Garden State Coalition of Schools.
Thank you, Kevin, for the introductions. Welcome to our panelists. It's an amazing and impressive panel, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today. I also want to thank the Restart team for welcoming me back and asking me to host again. So thank you to the Restart team, RestartED team. To our panelists, we're here today to talk about caring for each other and ourselves in school reopening. This is a time of great angst in the education profession as we're all gearing up for a return of some form with constantly changing guidelines. Our education system has been traumatized. We've been ripped out of our schools, out of our classrooms. We've been removed from our students. We've been removed from the place that we love and the connection that we crave with our students and our colleagues. We transitioned in crisis, and at the time we were hailed as heroes across the nation for being able to make a transition in moments. And as the school year came to an end and more difficulty with the length and the unknown and the uncertainty of what was going to happen with COVID-19 and the coronavirus and whatnot, public angst increased. The economy was tanking, social unrest was occurring. And so as the year concluded, anxiety and the summer set in. And we've had a constant set of changing guidelines and changing guidance throughout the nation, throughout our state. And now educators are being vilified for raising concerns about their self, their health, their wellness, their safety, the safety of their families. We're seeing educators being pinned against communities, districts being pinned against districts across the nation, across our states. Couple that with social unrest, 5 million plus COVID cases in the United States, and over 15 million jobless claims. And we're in a tsunami of crisis in front of us. And yet we were opening in 3.5 to 4 weeks in New Jersey and on the East Coast. And our colleagues across the nation, South, Southeast, and West, are in the midst of opening as we speak. So with that being said, to our panelists, and I'll just open it up to any of you who want to jump in. How do we create learning systems that are grounded in self-care and wellness is really where I want to start this evening. And maybe Terry, from a state perspective, I know you're with the Department of Education in Delaware. Perhaps you could kick us off with that.
Oh my goodness. As you talked, and first of all, I want to say thank you for having me. What an amazing panel. I wondered what I was doing here, actually, the more I listened to my colleagues. But as you talked, I thought about renaming myself and taking that off because I kind of feel my spirit welling up on this one. One of the things I learned early on after moving to the department is there are no permanent friends, there are no permanent enemies. And just like you said, we started out heroes, and here we are really being questioned on what our commitment to the profession. All of us love what we do. It was hard leaving abruptly. We didn't have the typical closures that we, the traditions, the celebrations, all of that. And we really had to stretch our resilience muscles during this time. But I do see an opportunity for us to demonstrate how we can come together and work together in a crisis, that with a crisis comes opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to reason together, share ideas, and recognize, pull out some of those social emotional skills and recognize that we're not always going to be able to agree, but we can disagree respectfully. And I think that is something that we're not seeing a lot in our society even right now. That the idea that we can share strong emotions, come down on different sides of the table, but still walk away with a common respect for each other's opinions. And I think that's really called for in this season.
Now, David, in your role, do you want to maybe build on what Terry shared with us?
Hey, Dave. Yeah, I think it's a really difficult question. I think what we're seeing is a failure in leadership, and people looking to pass the buck down the road to the lowest common denominator who wants to actually who want to be accountable, or who will be accountable to the people. And so I think what we're seeing is that our elected officials are not willing to make decisions. And so it's left to the educators. I was on a panel, actually I was on a panel with Chi the other day. And after that, we went to a conversation around outdoor learning. And what principals were saying in New York City was like, hey, yeah, we're happy to try this, but are we going to be liable if a student gets sick? Like, who is backing us up? And so unfortunately, I think what's happening here is that people are getting their anger directed, or directing their anger at the educators, at the superintendents, at the teachers, who are trying very hard to manage competing demands in which there is no right answer to be had. And so I guess what I would say here is that I look forward to our elected officials showing what leadership looks like, providing purpose, direction, and motivating us to have a common sense of purpose, understanding what the risks are, being able to articulate those risks, and then showing leadership rather than passing it down to our educators, to our superintendents, to our principals, to our teachers, to make decisions that, from my perspective, boards of education, superintendents, and teachers, principals, are not in a position to have to make with regards to public health and safety. So that's where I'm at on that. I appreciate the concern here about teachers being vilified. I think they're an easy out. At the same time, I really wish that the higher levels of our planning were more flexible, so that we would see opportunities for students, for example, to be educated in outdoor spaces, that we could see improvement in the quality of online learning. I think that's a big concern for parents, equity. And I think if we were in a place where leadership would say, this is on me, I got you, I got your back if something goes wrong, I'm not gonna let this come on your head, then I think we would see more flexibility in the kinds of thinking that people are willing to do.
David, that resonates on so many different levels. What we're feeling and what we're seeing, I think, collectively across the state is for New Jersey, 584 districts are being charged with doing their own thing, with no guidance that we feel we can stand on, as it feels like we're swimming in quicksand, and it can, every 2 weeks we get a new directive, a new change, and so it puts us in a very difficult ground. And it creates a lot of instability with sort of how we feel and how we're made to feel even whole as we make our decisions and can stand on our decisions. And it leads you to question whether or not you're doing the right thing constantly. And it doesn't create stability in the system. So Ken, as we think about stability in systems, and we think about like the three prongs of self-care, that can you tell us a little bit about your work at Rutgers? And
Absolutely. Well, first I want to say thank you for having me back, and it really is amazing being with an esteemed panel like this. I was glad to be brought back. I don't know if I'm going to be brought back after wearing this shirt, but I think it's and I loved how Terry and David set this tone, and you as well, David, where we're talking about people who have such compassion for the work. And when I heard that, the first thing that came to my mind is that the multiple prong approach is, first, anyone and everyone on the call recognizing the cost for caring is compassion fatigue. And I think everyone is feeling that, because they want to do the best possible job they can, because they value education, they love their students, they want to do what's best for themselves and the students and everyone who's attached within the school building. I just think we need to start there and having honest conversations like we're doing now, talking about we do have your back, and understanding that we need to grieve this loss of what it used to be. Terry, you pointed out, it just abruptly changed overnight. We didn't have closure. And so mourning that going through the grieving process of saying, we're not going to have a school day that we're familiar with, or a school year that's going to unfold. But once we have that acceptance, or we get closer to that acceptance, we can actually reimagine, rethink, and restart school with all the endless possibilities. The creativity that you all have as educators, and the students that you serve are amazing. They'll figure it out. So that's really I think the starting point in the multi-pronged approach. We all need to take care of each other and acknowledge what we've been through.
So that idea of taking care of each other leads right into an area where Chi and Pure Edge has spent a lot of time just recently providing an educator self care workshop series for New Jersey educators. I'm doing work all over the nation. In fact, I'll share that the first time I had the opportunity to meet Chi was actually at it was a town hall styled event for Mercer County, where we brought together all 9 school districts to talk about suicidal ideation and trauma in our community as we were reeling from a series of suicides. And she flew down from Boston to join us that night and handed me a business card and said, let's touch base and see how we can help support you and your colleagues. And over the last 3 years, Pure Edge has been right there supporting New Jersey educators. So Chi, can you talk to us a little bit about when you think about the work we can do to help support our colleagues as we return in the new year, and some of the work that you're doing with Pure Edge?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. And I still vividly remember, because I walked in that building, I had no idea who was in charge. I just knew whoever was in charge was going to be in the front row. And so I sat in the front, and I never sit in the front. So I feel really grateful that I actually had an opportunity to meet you, because I feel like the work that we've been able to do collectively for Mercer County and also for New Jersey has been, for our team specifically, we're getting the helper's high is what we keep kind of going through and trying to figure out ways to support. 2 things come to mind. I just want to address from the original piece is, having been in the seat of different, parts of the school system, my biggest irritation, I have to say, is that we've been so trained and wired across this country as educators, and that we're all in competition all the time. It's constant, right? It's a zero-sum game. We're in competition. We got to be better than this district because parents are going to compare us. They're shopping around. Great schools has all these. Everything that we've been suffering from in the last 30 years has really just, it's now getting underscored at how impossible that is actually for society, right? It's no longer about the common good. It's about complete, competition. And Dave, when you and I first met, I think it was that sense of, what are we doing to our kids? It's all this negativity that's just being wrapped around, and they're feeling like they're lost when they're actually going through a school process. This is all pre-COVID. And now, having this sort of competition again, this is the one time in life in education where leaders have to make decisions collectively. It's the only way we live in a town where our superintendent has not made a decision about school, but all 5 surrounding towns have already announced that they're going virtual. So to me, that makes no sense that one person is holding out, kind of go into the collective group, get some guidance. But again, Dave, I absolutely, I get frustrated just watching this. We're working with schools, districts, and agencies across the country, and there has to be a coherence of communication. There's no way we're going to actually get any kind of, collective good without that coherence of communication. It is really challenging on every single level. And I think the other piece that has underscored and exacerbated just the competition is that we've always worked in silos with different agencies, even at the state level, right? And state and local, just different kinds of municipalities, and not working in a collective. That part for me, I think, is why we're actually suffering so much from all the negativity. It's just one of those things that when, as Dave, Adams had pointed out, it's a lack of leadership completely across the board. And what that's doing for, I think, the capacity for human beings, we're just bombarded with all this negative energy all the time. And one thing that we've been trying to do when we think about the adults in the system, you're all, Dave, everyone in New Jersey, the superintendents, every educator, Terry and David Adams included, when you're working in school systems, you're constantly thinking about how to support others. And you feel guilt, at least I've been told that often, that the adults feel guilty for even just taking a walk, because they think that they need to be on this 24/7 track of trying to resolve problems when the problem actually isn't changing. And one of the things that we've been trying to do at Pure Edge is really allowing folks to just be reminded that when you actually care for yourself, that when you focus on where you're feeling, where your body is communicating with you, where are you feeling stress in your body, you got to listen to where that is, and then really advocating for yourself that you do take time. There's a great article. It was 20 years ago. It's called The Corporate Athlete. It's from Harvard Press. And these two researchers, they were studying professional athletes, and they actually ended up going into study executives. And The Corporate Athlete is a great article. It's readable, easily digestible, but really every one of the educators in this country, especially superintendents right now in the leadership, is that you really are a corporate athlete. And what corporate athletes do is train, right? You need to train just like as if you're going to train for a sporting event. But what corporate athletes don't do if they are, they don't actually have to take any time for recovery. And it's the recovery time that actually allows your body to heal. I know Ken would be able to speak to that. But that recovery time, what you do when you do the recovery time, you're actually improving your own self, the resilience, you're actually improving your own health. My biggest fear, honestly, is if we don't start really advocating for the adults in the system across the board, school bus drivers, food service workers, educators, everyone across the board, anyone who touches the life of a child, if we don't start advocating heavily that they need to make sure that they are working on their own wellness, that contagion of stress is real. The Dia actually was on our panel, Dave, and she was talking about, we could give advice to any of the teachers. What would you say? Just take care of yourselves. When you're less stressed, we're less stressed. There was this big focus on that piece, but I just wanted to share that with you because I worry about that a lot. So our team has been trying to provide as much support as possible across just to do the beginning of just the educator self-care and then going through with that. To date, we've spent, since the end of March, we've supported, I think we have 367 webinars that we've sponsored. And we've had, I think Monday we ended up with 30,000 participants so far.
It's amazing. Ken, you want to follow Chi?
Yeah, I was going to say, that was so beautifully said, Chi, is that we know if the cost for caring is going to be stress, everyone jumps right to the burnout, and we lose teachers, we lose caring staff throughout the school, and don't go to burnout. Why aren't we caring for each other? Why aren't we acknowledging that we do need to take time for ourselves? We do need to process all this. And it would really, I posted something, I tweeted out there in terms of Brene Brown did a great short little video on the difference between empathy versus sympathy. Empathizing and using empathy goes a long way, and recognizing that a teacher, an educator, an administrator, all school staff, they want to do the best that they can. And the pressures that are being put upon them and saying they're already failing, they're going to endanger the students when it's outside of their control, and they're going to do the best that they can while keeping everyone safe. So I'm so glad you said that, because otherwise we're going to see a lot of people get burned out, and it's going to be the end of these wonderful careers that are going to end, and students are going to get the education they so deserve.
So Ken, let's spend a little time diving into this as a panel. When we talk about supporting one another, empathizing with one another, I see a lot of educators trying to do that, and we're all still stuck in some kind of cycle. So what does building a strong SEL or self-care and wellness program for educators really look like? And Terry, I know in your role, you spend a lot of time thinking about that.
Yes, we actually call it building a culture of care. And that culture of care begins with a shared understanding of how important it is for us to take care of ourselves. We can't pour from an empty well. We also try to connect the brain science of stress so people understand, one, this is not an urban issue. This is not what happens in the poor performing school. This is all of us. We have an opportunity to build stronger brains for everyone in our community by taking the time to, we call it reflect, refocus, retool, and return. So returning to learning, returning to productivity. There are times when you need to tap out and you need to take a break, but you also have to build trust into the system so that people feel okay taking a break. I have an example. Last year, we had the opportunity through our partnership with Pure Edge to provide the Headspace app for our educators, and had so many questions from people wondering if we were tracking the number of breaks that they took, or would they be penalized for taking a break in the middle of the day. And so for me, that just highlighted the lack of trust in the system, that, while we were introducing this new paradigm, that there would be some repercussions for them taking time away, taking time to step back. So it is a mindset shift, and you really have to put a lot of work into providing professional learning, but also learning that captures the heart, so people build the commitment and really want to put into practice, apply some of the things that they're learning.
Now, David, in your role as, I guess, a senior director of strategy, and in your prior roles with social emotional coordinators for school districts, what are some starting places for districts that really haven't spent a lot of time building a culture of care? It's something that maybe they've talked about, but they haven't given explicit professional development on to their educators. Where would you start?
Well, I think, David, I appreciate the question. I think one of the more important things that we need to be able to talk about when we talk about care is really understanding care across the board, perspective taking, empathy, understanding where people are coming from, right? And so I think when we're talking about understanding the times that teachers are facing, the way we need to talk about this needs to be contextualized in the rest of society, so that people could understand that there are folks who are going back to work, who are going back to their jobs, who are also very scared. And I think when we start to understand across the board where these fears are, and understand what it means to have choice and not have choice, what do you do with that choice? What are the words that you use, and how do you frame that? It can help us come to a common understanding around where we want to be as a society. What role do we play, and do the different sectors in our societies play in order to build and maintain community? So I think the first thing we need to do is really, really get into our communities, right? What does it mean to have a father who is going to work every day as a bus driver, or a grandmother who's going to work every day as a home health care aide? What does it mean to not feel like you can send your kids back to school, or feel like you don't have any childcare, and you're going to have to leave them with a boyfriend, which we know is a very dangerous thing to do? What are these kinds of pressures? And then how do we build those communication spaces so that we can have a conversation, and we're not blaming each other, and we're not saying you're wrong and you're right and this is what we need to do and not need to do, but we need to take the perspectives of other people in our community, come together and say this is where we're at, so we can have an honest conversation about the best ways forward. So I'd say in the context right now, what we need to do is speak and listen to each other in a really truly honest way. I think more broadly, when we're talking about social and emotional learning in a broader space, I think for our principals, for our superintendents, what we need to do is think about how we're modeling these concepts. Are we speaking to each other in our schools? Do teachers have voice? Do students have voice? One of the most important things to do to teach social emotional skills to students is for teachers to model these social emotional skills in their own life. And I'm just going to tell you one story very quickly here. We have a program in one of our urban assembly schools where our upperclassmen teach SEL skills to our younger classmen. One of the students, Mary, talked about she was teaching these classes, and one of her classrooms was not paying attention, and she was about to get really upset and yell and put her foot down. And then she remembered, she teaches her kids to stop and think. She's like 11th grade, and she's teaching 9th grade. She got to stop and think, try and figure out what's happening, and then move from there. And she said, if I just started yelling and didn't try and figure out what's happening, I would be a hypocrite. I can't teach skills to people if I don't live those skills myself. So I would say right now, and where we're at and what we're feeling, we all need to live those skills. We all need to be listening to each other. We need to take the perspective of each other. And we need to figure out what it means to maintain our communities so that we can come out of here not fractured, not broken apart, not blaming each other, but sitting down and figuring out how to move forward.
David, I was just going to add something. It kind of led me to think that the young people right now are so on it. I'm so optimistic about their tenacity and just their ability to just kind of know and call BS when it's BS. This entire generation of kids right now has been just on fire in a good way. So that I feel really optimistic. And Dismary is one of those examples, like Dia is from West Windsor. The other piece I was going to add to this is really about, when we start to think about how we're engaging, like I go in that rabbit hole and that Twitter thing, and honest to God, I should not be there, but I cannot help myself. And, we know the ratio, we know how the brain works, right? We are looking for danger. We're looking for negativity. It just kind of underscores everything. It just, yeah, I knew that was going to be there. But then we just need to remember, like, a practical strategy is, look, for every one negative thing that happens to your brain, like a negative image, a negative tweet, a negative anything, it takes 5 positive things to just offset it, right? And that's 5, just to kind of make it maybe neutral. It's really going to take us about 10 things to really sort of go towards the other way and start to be more positive. One thing that I do know that we've been trying to focus on is shifting our mindset into, yes, you can address it. Notice how I'm feeling. Like for me, I notice that I'm angry. So now I need to figure out what I'm going to do with that. Take it, notice it, and then reshift. And I have to practice that constantly because I go down that path the same way that everyone else does. And I try so hard, Ken, but I might need a little family therapy from you. But it is one of those things where it takes a lot of practice. And I would say the one incremental step that we can all take is just notice. And then when we do feel that feeling, Dr. Carrion from Stanford University says, when you put that down in a journal, it doesn't have to be fancy. It can just be written down. Notice how you're feeling, when you're feeling it, jot it down so that you can connect that to a narrative. It's when you got triggered. What is it that triggered you? And then what happens when you have a narrative? So you have agency and you start to build your own resilience because you were able to identify what you got angry about and how to sort of get myself in a self-awareness piece so I can be more reflective and then start to hopefully have a better outcome for the thing I wanted to say, but I didn't. Anyways, I just wanted to add to that.
But I love that because remember, we've talked about this before. The next step for that is noticing without judging, because it's the judging piece that triggers the biases and all of the other ants, the automatic negative thoughts that come up that really take us down that rabbit hole. For me, it's been recognizing how I'm feeling, but making a conscious effort to challenge myself. And when things come up and those negatives come up, replacing it with something that's more hopeful, more promising, something that is going to build my resilience and shift me to another place.
So as you talk about resilience, we often talk about resilience and building resilience in students. What can we do to help build resilience for our educators?
I think some of I'm sorry, Ken, I'll just say some of the very practices that we are hoping to share with young people. Someone said it earlier, we have to embody it first. In order to co-regulate, you want to teach regulation, you need to be regulated. You've got to co-regulate. And so I think it's in the act of teaming to share those skills that we build them in ourselves, but we also demonstrate so that young people can learn those very skills vicariously from us.
Yeah, I was just going to add too, is that last week, Dr. Ishibashi mentioned about teaching, learning, and scheduling considerations for school. She talked about a balance. This is exactly what this group is talking about. There must be a balance in this whole thing. We shouldn't overload a student. We shouldn't underload. The same is true for ourselves. We don't need to overload ourselves. And we know what happens when we underload, we disconnect. So I think it's an important story that we can look back to as a child and think about Goldilocks. The Goldilocks zone is just right. Think about, we want to balance our life where it is just right. We know there's plenty of life must-dos. We have to do things for taking care of ourselves. That's a must-do. We need to do things for our job. These are life must-dos. But there's also this family responsibility that we all have for our larger self that we're connected to. If we're fortunate, there's must-dos. So we need to find that right, just right. And like it worked out with Goldilocks. I figured it can't go wrong with us in the school. And it's exactly, and it was talked about last week. So I feel very confident that whatever it looks like, the educators You got it.
You've brought up another visual for me though. The idea of creating that balance introduces an opportunity to tip the scales a little bit. And so while there are so many things going on that we cannot change and don't have a lot of control over, we can build up positives, we can build up protective factors, we can form stronger relationships and reach out to others, because while you can't change what you're going through, you can change who you go through it with. And it matters who we are, who we're coping with right now. Do we gravitate to the folks who are, really struggling and bringing us down with a lot of negative energy, or make a conscious effort to spend time and in activities that bring us light, make us feel better?
If I could build off of that, David, I'm sorry, you talked about this, like, what does it take, right? And I've been in the Army Reserve now 18 years, and we do a lot of scary things. And the fuel for doing those things is trust. It's trust in your teammates, trust in the process, trust in your supervisors, trust in your people behind you. It is so important. It is, to me, the most important thing in an organization, to build the type of trust that allows people to take chances and take risk. So going back to our original point here, one of the challenges when leadership is weak in this area is that there's just not enough trust for people to want to take risk. And then that fear takes over that sense of resolve. That anxiety is more apparent than that sense of motivation. So we need to really think about leadership here as what it takes to fuel people taking chances, right? People one time talked to me about school reform, school change, and said, well, what's the fuel? What's the energy that gets people to move from where they are to where they need to be? And I can tell you right now that energy is trust. It's consistency and belief in outcomes. It's communication that relates to that trust. It's the ability to have clarity in terms of what's supposed to happen. And maybe that's going to change tomorrow. But that conversation needs to be clear, consistent, and have communication behind it. So I really want to talk about what trust means in an organization, what trust means in our society. And when we don't have it, it creates a vacuum where fear and anxiety breed, and that stops us from moving forward.
David, honestly, that just, I went like, yes. People's basic needs are not being met right now across this country. I mean, if people are hungry, they're losing their homes, they're not working, there's all these things where they cannot actually, there's no predictability of life. And when there's a lack of predictability, there's a lack of trust. I absolutely agree with you. I think that piece, even just the way Terry said, look, we're giving you headspace. Are you going to mark us for that? Are you going to ding us? Are you going to track when we take a break? Right, that whole area, and every one of the superintendents who's ever been in negotiations with unions, it's the same piece, right? It's that what's the transparency, what's the trust? It's all of the same kinds of feelings. And just to underscore the value of emotional intelligence and the value of emotions, right? That's driving all of us right now. It's not our right. Dr. Mark Brackett would tell us, right? It's not our cognition that's driving us. It's all of our feelings. And I think that part of us, can go either try to go into homeostasis, or we go, and tip those scales one way or the other. But I absolutely agree. It's such a great point.
And who would have figured, in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're really at this point in 2020 that we have to worry about safety. There are people who don't have enough to eat. There are people who, again, don't have a shelter over their head. It's 2020. And thank you for your service, David. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And David looks like he's 12 years old, but he's been serving for 18. It's just extraordinary.
So as in a prior webinar that we had with Restarted, Ken, you talked about this concept of all being in the same storm, but being in different boats. And I was wondering if you could sort of revisit that from the perspective of caring for each other and being cognizant of one another.
And thank you. It's just an opportunity that I had in learning from those that I served in New Jersey's children's system of care, and the families that I learned from, the colleagues, the anyone and everyone who's attached, pointing out that the basic life necessities over my 17 years out of a 20-year system, there are still people who are without food, without a good education, and it boggles my mind every time I look at a calendar. And so when I heard the expression, we're all in the same boat during this COVID storm, I couldn't help but say, you know, this, and I heard it somewhere else before, I'm like, it's not true. We're in the same storm. We're in different boats. And you started seeing this. I've become a fan of social media as well. And you see some of the people with affluence, with money, you know, taking a vacation and weathering out the COVID situation. When there's some people who've lost, you know, loved ones, who lost their jobs, who don't have an eviction notice now, but when this ends, they won't have a job and they'll be out on the street. So our boats are different. And to the point where I just, you know, visual is that some people, when you think about them in the boat, they don't even have a means to get around. There's not even oars moving them in a small boat that might have, you know, 10 people in it, and they're elbow to elbow, especially during the sheltering in process. And the waves are just taking them. That shouldn't be. In a country where there's so many people that have, why aren't we helping those and empowering those? More importantly, and education is the true empowering. It's if we give them you know, everyone a good education, we can do so much. And the fact that we're going to be possibly jeopardizing the lives of our educators and our students because we haven't figured this out is mind-boggling. And that's why the RestartED team, I'm so honored in this panel. There's hope. There is hope. And that's really when I mentioned, it just bothered me when everyone said they're in the same boat. That's not true. And you know what? That's BS. That stuff, it works in your garden, and that's just about all it does. It grows great tomato plants here in New Jersey, and that's all it does.
So to our panel, as you think about self-care strategies and caring for one another, we're going to have educators in all different type of circumstances this upcoming school year. We're going to have some in hybrid models that are within the same department, within the same district, within the same school, that some are working remotely and some are in person. What are some of the strategies that you could see employed to make sure that individuals are being checked in with, to make sure that we're building relationships as departments, within faculties, amongst our colleagues, that people are feeling heard, that the opportunity for voice exists? You know, as you start thinking about self-care strategies, even what training looks like, and when we're in all of these different types of medium.
I just want to add to address that. One of the things I would say is, you know, right now teachers are trying to figure out what they're going to do with their kids if they're in a hybrid or online situation, and they're thinking of these things that they can do for students. And I would argue that keeping it simple as possible, whatever they think is good for the students, if they're willing to do it themselves, then you know you've kind of got a winner, right? So for us, when we do self-care strategies, it's universal, whether we're doing even in, even out, we've got starfish breathing or take 5, you know, using your body, wherever you feel the stress in your body, using those same muscles to reverse the same, you know, the impact of the stress. But I would say that anything, situations or, you know, skills, strategies where they would actually want to do with their own students, if they're not willing, if they don't think it's going to be helpful for them as an adult, like, oh, this is good for kids, but not for me. In this particular environment, I would take that off the table. I would always do things in these hybrid situations or remote situations that I would love to do as a human being. To me, that makes it easier. It's easier for planning, and you're really starting to do the heart connection work as opposed to what's the best lesson that I can teach. I think that is a sort of a coherent strategy that you can take across the board. I do want to caution about the check-ins, though. I know there's a lot of, you know, talk about, yeah, check-ins are so important, but it depends on who's checking in and for what purpose and what you're actually asking them to check in for. Right? If you have experienced a ton of loss, all those kinds of things, keeping things as super simple as possible and making it where you're willing to do exactly the same thing as kids, that, you know, it's good for your community, because we do know that both stress and joy are contagious. And so being able to do things that are always for the collective good, I think that's number one. And my second piece that I will say is, My favorite time when we're in schools is if a teacher or a principal or a staff member wants to send their kid to the school that they work at. You just know that they are putting it all there. Their heart and soul is there. Any school that you step on, if you're willing to put your own child or your own family members in that school and you want them to attend, then you know you're creating this environment where you believe that the common good is good for the human being, not just for academics, but all collectively. So those are my two that I would suggest.
I think I might want to start the year with some community healing. We've all gone through this together, and we know that there are ways to restore ourselves physically, but also focus on some level of post-traumatic growth. And so maybe some of the communal strategies like drumming or rocking or, group movement to some extent. I think I'd want to start with something like that. And then secondly, focus on relationships, building strong relationships. Sometimes when I think about talking with youth, I use this term that I want to talk so kids will listen and listen so kids will talk. I think we want to do the same thing with our colleagues. We want to build relationships. And to build that level of trust, we have to be quiet sometimes and let people share and really get off their chest some of their experiences and sit with them in some of those tough spaces until we're ready to move into more active or more cerebral types of activities.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, when you listen to teachers right now, they're saying it took me 5 years of teaching to get my window fixed so it could be open. I've never had ventilation in my classroom and it's 95 degrees and I just don't trust the system. I don't believe that I can do this in a safe way. And so, I mean, the advice that I would give and the recommendations that I would put forth is to be as transparent as we can possibly be about where we are and what we can do to support our teachers. If it's going to take 5 years to get a window open, then that's not a safe place for our kids. If we can get a window open, then that's one step to mitigating some of the challenges that we're seeing. So I think what happens here is when people put things in a black hole and people are not responsive to the needs and to the physical needs of people, emotional needs, we start to lose that sense that I matter, that what I care about is important. And so I think we're coming into this where our teachers just do not have that faith. Our principals don't have the faith that they got their backs taken care of. Our superintendents don't have the faith, and our teachers don't have the faith that people are actually caring about them at this point in this time. And then I think the last thing is that we need to start off, and I said this before, we need to start off with a clear sense of perspective, right? We need to understand that we value and honor our teachers and we believe in what they've done for our communities and for our nation. And at the same time, our teachers need to be able to speak the language of those who have not had a choice, but to go back into the field and do their jobs. And if they can say that, and if they can speak to those, and if they can honor those people who are mostly lower income, who are mostly women, who are mostly Black and Hispanic, if they can speak to those people and say, I hear you, I recognize you, then we're one step closer to building the types of communities that allow us to solve problems together.
So one of the questions from one of our folks that are registered here with us tonight asks for us to consider practices that school leaders can implement to support teachers to adjust and grow in the dynamic environment that we're in front of. Any thoughts from the panel on how administrators can support teachers to adjust and grow in this new environment? We've talked about trust. We've talked about listening to voice. Is that the secret sauce? Is it as simple as that? Or are we we're going a lot deeper?
I would actually argue, Dave, that every superintendent needs to start taking care of themselves first. I just, in the last 2 weeks of just seeing the feed of what's happened and getting guidance from, even just counsel, don't sign that document that the governor wants you to sign. I mean, just that alone, I worry actually that we're going to lose a tremendous amount of great leadership if we don't start taking care of just your health first, right? And you, if we jump straight to what you're going to do for teachers, again, we're just, pushing that down so that you're carrying all the load. And I think in this particular time, being as transparent as possible, as Dave said, just really being able to have a specific plan that that you are going to be able to have a reciprocal self-care aspect of your community. And you know that, right? If you take care of yourself, your staff sees you, your principals see you take care of yourself, then they're going to feel like, oh, okay, I can actually go for a walk and it'll be okay. And then when the principals do that and they model that, the teachers are going to feel that it's okay. It's all of that modeling. And that's what I mean about that coherence of communication. I just think that's critical because we can, we know that just from a young age, kids watch us, they don't listen to us. They watch our actions and they mimic our actions. And it might be some of the words that we say, but it's a lot of mimicking. And I think that modeling structure and that, the reciprocity of the well-being, I think is critically important. But I think also having pods, just the same way that parents want pods for their kids and, and doing this, I think it's super important to actually have adults have pods as well, where you have check-in groups. I do worry quite a bit about the teachers that show burnout aren't actually the loud ones. They're not, the ones that sort of are screaming, and they're the ones that are really quiet. They kind of go into the blue zone, they retreat, they just go right under the radar. And oftentimes those are the ones that we are, they're struggling, but they just don't know how to, they're not at that place where they can actually outreach. So having pods for adults as well, I think is critically important. And not just for teachers, I would do it as a across the board system wide. So you've got someone from classified, certificated, and in other groups that you have in your school communities. I just think it's critically important to keep it small, but just have a different view of folks.
Chi, on behalf of my colleagues and I just want to just pause and say I appreciate the comment about leaders needing to make sure that they're taking care of themselves. I think for many of us, what we're feeling it goes back to one of David's earlier points, that our elected officials that we rely upon to provide guidance and clarity, and those that they appoint to higher offices need to step up and make sure that they are providing clear guidance that actually is not basked in this guise of flexibility as a way in which we can make everything feel better. The reality is there's certain standards that need to be upheld around health and wellness that you don't need flexibility on. When we're talking about a global pandemic that has 5 million Americans and 160,000 plus Americans have passed away, including educators throughout our state and one of my staff members. So I don't need them to wait till 3 weeks before the opening to drop health guidance today. And so what you're seeing, I think, in the Twitterverse or Instagram or anywhere else that educators and administrators are lashing out, there's an exhaustion. There's an exhaustion of failure of guidance. Giving us guidance on June 26th for reopening 8 weeks away, and then not clarifying that, and then furloughing the entire Department of Education for 3 weeks on top of it, so you don't get clarity to the end of July. And you're sitting there trying to build your master schedule at the end of July when you would have been locked in by then. And it's not just the superintendent, all those principals, assistant principals, and supervisors that are essentially trapped in their offices or in their home basements or wherever, trying to figure this out and isolated. So I really worry about our profession and the collective exhaustion that's going on. I worry about my colleagues constantly, and I know they worry about me. And I think because I know we're worrying about each other and we're checking in on each other, there's a comfort in that. So we need to make sure that we continue to connect. And Ken, I wanted to circle back to you with your work around sort of the home connection that you've referenced in some of your work, and the importance of that balance between the three domains of self, home, and work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that you mentioned too that our homes have become our place of employment, and during the sheltering in, it's become our community, and we're still really living that way for the most part. So as educators, as people, any aspect of it's anyone on this planet, we really need to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves, like Chi said, and the best way we can do that is to recognize that we are dealing with this, and we need to limit the amount of time that we're working in front of the computer, modeling for our own children. Because when you think about it, we're not going to be any help to anyone if we're dealing with this and the stress that we're under. And again, it's the cost for caring that we need to do. And I think that's the conversation. And that goes with what Dave was saying about community. We live in a community. We are educators, we're therapists, we're brothers, sisters, cousins, neighbors, and we're all connected in this passion, this way. And if we have compassion for ourselves and recognizing it, someone might say to me, and my neighbor did this the other day. He said, "Ken, you really look, tired." And he was across the street. And I'm saying, if he can see it across the street, I can only imagine a little closer. Are you okay? Because I only see you go out of your house around 2 o'clock, and that's when I end my webinars. And I often do webinars for the Children's System of Care, sometimes 3, 4, 5, times in a week. And so it's important to look and care and ask those questions, because our homes have become our work. But we're connected hopefully to our families and our loved ones. So.
And recognizing that time is coming towards an end, I wanted to give all of our panelists an opportunity to provide some maybe words of wisdom, but maybe we can do this following one of Castle's SEL signature practices from their playbook with maybe an optimistic closure. So if I invite all of our panelists to offer our audience or in one another an optimistic offering about the upcoming 2021 year.
Well, I think I would offer that we have truly had a traumatic experience together. Often when we are supporting others, we haven't gone through it too, but this is something that happened to all of us. But during this time, we have learned to be nimble, learned to be more flexible. We've identified things that lift us up. Some days it may be listening to music. On other days, I had to wear a dress, or I changed my hair. I did things to keep myself encouraged and to keep myself strengthened so I could take on the task ahead. Know the things that feed your spirit and do those things, because that's what's going to prepare you for the work ahead.
Thank you, Chair.
I was just going to share my optimistic closure. I'm just so grateful that you all are doing this, Dave. I think having a collective of colleagues that allow you all to sort of share broadly out through the state and nationally, I think is just a beautiful gift to the community. That's one. And I feel like if that was something that every state did, honestly, I feel like that would be a huge win across there, just as leadership goes. The other piece is I do think that my hope is that everyone who is in schools working in that you never ever feel guilt for taking care of yourself. That is just one thing that we don't need anymore as adults, right? We grew up with guilt. We were raised, like I was raised with guilt. I say that this is a Korean thing, and people say, well, I'm Jewish, I had the same thing. I'm Catholic, I had the same thing. But just all this guilt surrounding about, taking care of ourselves, just know that is taking care of yourself is the least selfish thing that you can do. It actually will make you a better partner. It'll make you a better leader, and it'll make you just a better member of our society for the common good, right? When I wear a mask, you can wear a mask. I feel like it's just this little collective trickle of goodness that we can push out.
Awesome. Thank you, Chief. David or Ken?
You want to go? Okay, great. So, I think optimism for me is looking at my kids. So I have 2 sons, Elijah and Isaiah. We do character every night, and we look at quotes. And we're often grounded in the example of people like Frederick Douglass, people who learned to read by candlelight under threat of death, right, in order to improve himself and his community. And if Frederick Douglass' example has led me to be here, right? If I can honor his example in my life, then I have faith that we can come together and understand what we need to do to ensure that our communities, that our children have the opportunity to learn. And so my faith in my example is knowing what people did to better themselves, knowing what people sacrificed to make me, to give me a position to be here. And taking that notion and bequeathing it to my sons, and helping educators to move through some of the challenges that we have, and focus on creating a community where we can make sure that our students are advancing, and contributing to our society.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, David. And Ken, bring us home.
Okay. I was going to wear a hat, and I was a little reluctant to put a D on it because a D, I'm told, is not one of the best grades. But this hat was given to me by my daughter, who is furloughed and has been furloughed working for Disney. And I think the 3 Ds that we, as a panel right here, talked about a lot is the details matter. Details. The first D, the small things in life are important, and each one of us are important. And the second D, in terms of diversity, we're different. We learn different. We have a different world's perspective. Celebrate, embrace it. It's a great thing. And the third is determination, the human spirit. In terms of if things that we have a goal for and we work, we make those steps, we stumble, we learn from our stumbling, get up and keep on going. So I'm honored to be part of this group. So next time as educators, you see someone with a D, and I've gotten a couple of in my time, sadly enough, it's not failing. And next thing, we're going to move people to a B and hopefully gather that information, not for grades, but they get all the information. So thank you. It's been a true honor.
Ken, thank you for constantly dropping those nuggets of wisdom on us, Ken. And thank you to all the panelists for being here and taking your time and joining us this evening. Next week, the Restart Ed panel is going to be on reopening early lessons learned from school superintendents and leaders from around the country that have already opened or in the very opening stages of their school communities to talk to us and give us some insight of what they've faced and what they've learned in their openings. So we look forward to that panel next week, and we hope everyone can join. Again, thank you to our panelists. We hope you can join us in the after call. And again, thank you to all our audience for joining this evening. Take good care.
Thank you.
All right, be well.